The first report was logged at 3:17 a.m., July 9th, 1992. Tower records from Miami International detail a radar blip, anomalous in speed, vector, and transponder signal, appearing over Key Largo, sweeping in from the Gulf at an elevation far too low for any commercial flight path. The transponder ID matched a flight number long since retired, 077, an American domestic route from Dallas-Fort Worth to Atlanta. FAA logs list it as lost over Tennessee airspace, vanished mid-transit in April 1983. Declared a probable crash. No wreckage ever found, no bodies. 37 passengers and 5 crew declared legally dead by 1987. The case was closed until that night. The tape of the control tower's internal communications wasn't supposed to leak, but it did. A shortwave radio archivist, scanning old aviation channels from an abandoned monitoring post near Lake Okeechobee, recorded the last few minutes before the reappearance. "This is Delta 077 requesting emergency landing clearance. We've been diverted, experiencing instrument malfunction." The voice sounded panicked, but it wasn't the panic of someone crashing. It was the panic of someone who thought they were being followed. The controller, uncertain, responded with standard FAA protocol: identification, location, altitude. The reply came with hesitation. "We're not sure. Our last log entry reads April 14th, 1983. Within 15 minutes, the tape was pulled from every archive. The archivist's website went offline 2 days later. He has not been heard from since. But witnesses remember. The red-eye mechanic on duty at Hangar 3 saw the plane touch down. He told a Miami Herald reporter in a 2003 interview that the wheels didn't sound right. Too soft, almost like they didn't touch concrete. Another baggage crew member said the fuselage looked washed out, as if the paint had faded under decades of exposure, even though the model should have been flying only 10 years prior. Most disturbing, according to a confidential memo from the NTSB obtained by a whistleblower, was the cabin temperature, reportedly at 104 degrees Fahrenheit inside, though the environmental controls were powered off. That detail has never been explained. Customs officials arriving at the tarmac were told to stand down. Homeland Security cordoned off the plane within 12 minutes of landing. Witnesses were ordered to leave the premises. The craft was moved to a now-defunct hangar near the western perimeter of the airport. Hangar 19, officially condemned in 1991 due to asbestos exposure. No footage exists of the towing process. A single grainy photo, showing the plane parked under spotlights with 2 black SUVs nearby, was anonymously mailed to a Jacksonville news station in 1996. It was never aired. Of the people on board, there are no confirmed survivors. The official statement, issued by the FAA 5 days later, claimed the flight was a simulated military training exercise using a decommissioned aircraft, but inconsistencies piled up. Family members of the original 1983 passengers reported strange phone calls, heavy breathing, mechanical static, a voice saying, "I'm almost home," before disconnecting. 3 separate families received unmarked packages within a month, each containing what appeared to be worn flight attendant uniforms, a weathered Delta Airlines badge, and, most disturbing, a Polaroid of a dark cabin interior. In one of them, a woman's face is partially visible in the window reflection, mouth open in what appears to be a scream. The plane's flight log was recovered, though it was heavily redacted. What little escaped censorship suggests that Flight 177 had never landed. Instead, it had entered an area of temporal dislocation over Cumberland Plateau, a phrase not found in any standard aviation handbook. A Freedom of Information Act request, filed in 1999, returned blank pages and a warning. Disclosing information related to anomalous aeronautical activity is a federal offense. And then there's the weather. Satellite data from that night, preserved by NOAA analysts, shows a circular atmospheric anomaly above southern Georgia, roughly 82 miles wide, with a core temperature drop of 31 degrees in under 90 seconds. Clouds formed and dispersed within minutes. Ground witnesses described a high-pitched humming sound, nausea, and, in 2 cases, temporary memory loss. One trucker who was driving south on I-75 reported seeing a glowing shape like a cigarette burn in the sky, hovering for a full minute before vanishing. He died in a single-car accident 12 days later. Brakes failed, toxicology clean. His autopsy report listed cranial hemorrhaging inconsistent with the crash. It also listed, curiously, extreme degradation of inner ear tissue, more typical of prolonged exposure to infrasound or high-altitude pressure variants. The deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Delta Airlines quietly settled lawsuits with 3 former employees who spoke publicly about the event. All 3 have since disappeared from public record. The Miami Herald's original article was pulled before print. A single printed draft copy, smuggled by a junior intern, contained this line: "The dead are speaking, and they want to know why we moved on without them." The intern was found 2 years later, living in an RV in New Mexico, refusing to speak to anyone but a stuffed rabbit named Leon. She kept repeating one phrase: "It wasn't 9 years, it was all the years." And still, the official record stands. Flight 077 never existed past April 1983. But if that's true, what exactly landed in Miami? Aviation archives housed in the National Transportation Safety Board headquarters contain thousands of incident reports: engine failures, airspace incursions, mid-air collisions. But tucked between the pages of a 1984 file on weather pattern anomalies over the Appalachian Corridor is a single anomalous document: a thermal image captured by a meteorological balloon over northern Alabama on April 14, 1983. The image, while grainy, shows a torus-shaped heat signature hovering at approximately 28,000 feet. Directly in its center, there is a small object, elongated, with a temperature footprint matching that of a Boeing 727. That object remained stationary for 2 minutes before abruptly vanishing from the frame. The balloon crashed 2 hours later. Its internal flight log had been magnetically wiped. Only the printed photos, preserved in a technician's locker, survived the purge. The technician, now retired, agreed to speak in 2005 under the condition of anonymity. "I didn't know what I was looking at," he said. "But it wasn't a storm system. It moved like it was observing. And the plane, it wasn't flying. It was just there." Onboard manifest records from Flight 077 listed a man named Ellis Granger, a nuclear physicist from Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Granger specialized in quantum anomalies, specifically temporal convergence theory. His published work had been dismissed by mainstream academics, yet internal Department of Energy memos classified his last project as sensitive, Tier 4 compartmentalized. In layman's terms, need to know, even within the Pentagon. Granger's family had not spoken publicly since his disappearance in 1983. But after the Miami incident, his daughter reportedly received a voicemail from an untraceable number. The recording, distorted and fractured, contained 3 words: "He's still calculating." She checked into a psychiatric clinic 3 days later. Her intake file lists her primary delusion as receiving mathematical dreams. One former TSA analyst, who later defected to Canada, claimed in a leaked interview that the recovered aircraft was not physically the same. Not just faded or corroded, altered. The emergency hatches had no internal bolts. The windows were thinner, almost pliable. Cabin seats were fused to the floor with no visible welds. Black box data extracted from the wreckage, later destroyed in a warehouse fire, recorded a constant 78 BPM thumping sound during the entire flight duration. Not engine noise, not turbulence, a pulse. One section of the audio transcript reads, "Passenger 17B, repeating phrase, 'Doors are wrong,' 17 times before becoming unresponsive." Another line, buried under 5 layers of decryption, simply states, "Cabin time offset, minus 3,290 days. No context, no interpretation, no follow-up. In 1994, a disavowed Air Force colonel, speaking through an encrypted BBS forum, posted a series of scanned documents labeled Project Mirrorlight. The documents detailed a series of experimental radar arrays being tested in the Tennessee Valley during the early 1980s. These arrays, designed to detect foreign stealth aircraft, accidentally generated harmonic frequencies when exposed to certain stratospheric pressure conditions. One entry reads, April 12-14, 1983, sustained overlap event. Thermal signatures indicate temporary corridor opening. The terminology suggests the creation of a stable aperture, not through space, but time. Buried within those pages was a sketch of a 727, identical tail number to Flight 077. Handwritten beneath, object reappears 2021-2030 window, location indeterminate, watch Miami. The files vanished within a week, and yet traces remain. Insect specimens recovered near the tarmac that night in Miami were sent for routine analysis. Lab results indicated genetic drift of over 8.6%, a mutation rate far too rapid for 9 years of natural evolution. Botanists tasked with evaluating plant material found clinging to the landing gear described the foliage as similar to southern scrub pine, but with chloroplasts more akin to deep-sea algae. One researcher was reportedly reprimanded for describing the samples as botanically homesick. But perhaps the most chilling clue came from a janitor at the hangar where Flight 077 was held before being moved to a black site. He filed an anonymous report with a local news tip line. He claimed that during his shift on the second night, he heard music coming from inside the plane. Not alarms, not static, a slow, warbled version of Blue Skies like it was playing underwater. He walked toward the fuselage. The music grew louder. He said he felt pressure in his ears, like descending in an elevator. And then he saw them. Shapes, pressed against the windows. Not waving, not banging, just staring. The janitor quit that night. His report, though dismissed as fantasy, was transcribed and logged under a file named Duo77 PSI residual. The original tape of the call no longer exists. The deeper you go into the story of Flight 077, the more it unravels not into answers, but reflections. It's like looking into a mirror that doesn't reflect you, but something waiting behind you. Something that saw the world turn for 9 years and decided to come back anyway. Or maybe it never left. Maybe it was only ever waiting for someone to open the gate. And someone did. In 2007, a private contractor working on infrastructure renovations near the Miami airport accidentally unearthed a concrete-encased vault beneath the old service tunnel adjacent to Hangar 19. The contractor, Luis Javier Martinez, submitted a formal site report to the FAA after his crew breached the structure and found what he described as an air-conditioned bunker with no doors, no wiring, and no sign of human entry. Inside, there was only one object, a folded Delta Airlines flight map from 1983, marked with a black circle over Chattanooga. There were no fingerprints. The temperature inside the sealed vault registered at 57 degrees Celsius, exactly the average internal cabin temperature of a pressurized 727 in mid-flight. Luis was detained by federal agents less than an hour later. His construction company was dissolved within 3 weeks, and FAA records show the permit was reassigned to a defense subcontractor with known ties to DARPA. Luis's whereabouts remain unknown. His wife filed a missing persons report on August 2nd. It was closed without investigation. The Chattanooga circle wasn't arbitrary. It was precisely aligned with the last radar ping from Flight 077 before it disappeared, a moment long buried beneath bureaucracy and classified military reports. But one document from the Tennessee Air National Guard, discovered in a declassified batch in 2016, shows that on the night of April 14, 1983, an experimental Lockheed surveillance craft was launched from the Smyrna airfield on an unscheduled recon sweep. Its mission objective, scrawled hastily in the margins, observe corridor distortion. The aircraft recorded a heat column stretching from the ground to the upper stratosphere, shimmering like glass in water, as the pilot later described in his only interview. He claimed that as he passed over the distortion, his onboard altimeter fluctuated violently, as if gravity itself was folding. His navigator blacked out for 23 minutes, waking up with a nosebleed and no memory. The report never made it past internal review. In a handwritten addendum, the pilot added one more observation. Saw a 727 inside the light. Still, nose first, like it was thinking. These words were dismissed as hallucination, but they match almost exactly the recollection of Michelle Enright, one of the last people to claim a direct connection to Flight 077. Enright was 8 years old when her father, Douglas Enright, boarded that flight. For years, she believed he died in the crash. Then, in 1992, she received a birthday card. No return address, no postage, just a blank envelope slipped through the mail slot. Inside, a card with faded cartoon balloons and a short note. "Michelle, I've been dreaming of sunlight. I'm almost there. Dad." Handwriting confirmed. Ink dated to the early 1980s. No fingerprints, no fibers. Just a trace of sediment on the paper, a mix of quartz and copper oxide found primarily in deep cave ecosystems. Enright was placed under federal observation for 72 hours after she attempted to share the card with local media. Her psychiatrist noted she reported persistent humming in her ears and recurring dreams of walking through a plane cabin where no one moved but everyone was breathing. She described stewardesses frozen in mid-sentence and an exit door covered in frost. These motifs are not isolated. Between 1993 and 2002, at least 19 people from across the eastern United States filed reports to paranormal forums claiming they had seen Flight 077 in flight. In some cases, the craft hovered, suspended like a mobile, engines silent. In others, it was grounded in a field or over water, always dimly lit from within, always watched, never interacting. These sightings were often followed by power outages, compass malfunctions, or localized weather shifts. A meteorologist in Biloxi reported a hot wind with a radio taste, the same night a pilot claimed to have trailed a white Delta jet that vanished mid-air over the bay. All 19 individuals were later contacted by an unknown entity calling itself Department 8. Posing as census officials or energy auditors, they visited each subject's home and asked a series of peculiar questions. Have you been experiencing irregular light patterns? Do you remember being in flight? Have any clocks in your home stopped at 9:41 p.m.? That time, 9:41, appears in the maintenance records of Flight 077's last radio transmission. It is also the precise minute the transponder ID reactivated over Florida 9 years later. In a coincidence too exact to ignore, several archived logs from NORAD show a temporary surveillance blackout over the eastern seaboard exactly at 9:41 p.m. on both April 14, 1983 and July 9, 1992. These blackouts lasted precisely 77 seconds. System logs were wiped. No technical explanation has ever been given. Some theorists believe this alignment of time, space, and malfunction suggests a kind of engineered recurrence, a loop not of time, but of circumstance, where a plane doesn't return from the past, but continues on a parallel course, brushing against the membrane of our world only when the variables match. A ghost in the math. And if that's the case, then the next alignment may already be approaching. In 2011, a joint operation between the NSA and an unacknowledged research branch of the FAA, known only as Division E, conducted a sweep of Cold War-era radio bands, searching for anomalous transmissions linked to disused aviation frequencies. Among the data recovered was a string of repeated bursts on 121.5 MHz, the international emergency frequency, long associated with aircraft in distress. The pattern was irregular, like Morse, but not quite. Analysts deciphered only one repeating phrase, hidden within layered frequency harmonics. Maintain course. Turbulence is temporary. The message was traced to a shortwave beacon somewhere in the Appalachian foothills, not an official FAA station. When a field team was dispatched to the coordinates, they found nothing but an old Ranger outpost. Inside, the radio was still transmitting. The logs on the outpost desk dated back to 1983. They stopped abruptly on April 14th. The ranger assigned there, a Vietnam veteran named Arnold Finch, had never been found. His personnel file had been marked inactive, non-recoverable. But his field journal remained. In the last entry, scrawled hastily and half-finished, were the words, "They're talking in reverse. They don't blink. They want me to fly." Photographs pinned to the cabin's corkboard showed aerial views of Tennessee's highland rim, with strange cloud formations shaped like concentric spirals, identical to radar scans seen the night Flight 077 vanished. A strip of black and white film, undeveloped, was hidden in a coffee can beneath the floorboards. After processing, investigators found frames of a 727 flying through fog, trailing no contrail. In the last frame, the sky is empty, and the foreground is filled with distorted, discolored streaks, like static turned physical. That film roll has never been publicly released. Further investigation into Flight 077's final minutes before disappearance uncovered another strange anomaly. The aircraft's flight plan passed directly over a region near Spencer, Tennessee, home to a now abandoned civilian radar tower known as Echo Station. This tower, erected in the early 70s during regional upgrades to civilian aviation infrastructure, was decommissioned in 1984 after sustained magnetic inconsistency began to interfere with onboard instruments of aircraft flying overhead. What's strange is that during the official inquiry into Flight 077's disappearance, Echo Station was never mentioned, not once. Records from regional aviation logs, however, show that in the hour before Flight 077 lost contact, 6 other flights diverted around that airspace due to onboard anomalies. One pilot recorded in his logbook, "Cabin clocks all stopped at 9:41, recalibrated manually. Passengers uneasy. One said we flew over a mirror." The mirror. That word appears again in a psychiatric report dated 1992 from a patient who had never flown, but who was found wandering the edges of Miami International during the week of Flight 077's reappearance. He carried a boarding pass, issued in 1983. Dressed in outdated clothes, he had no ID, no explanation. When questioned, he simply said, "I got off early. They're still inside. It's still flying." The patient was placed under federal psychiatric hold. His name was never released, but a nurse later claimed he would recite seat numbers in his sleep. All of them matched the manifest of Flight 077. Back in Tennessee, locals around Echo Station began reporting strange phenomena as early as 1982. Distorted wildlife calls, sudden nosebleeds, watches stopping for entire hours. One child claimed her father came home early from work one evening, then stood motionless in the living room for 6 hours before speaking. He said, "The doors are wrong, but we boarded anyway." He was found dead the next day in his car, engine running, radio set to static. Among the urban legends that later spread in the area, one stands out. Campfire stories about the silver stairs in the fog, a set of metallic boarding stairs found in the woods during mornings of heavy mist. Locals say those who see the stairs and try to climb them vanish. The next day, the stairs are gone. There's no proof. But in 1995, a hiker found an aircraft seat deep in the woods. Seat number 12A, same model used in 727s. A tree had grown around it. Inside the seat pocket was a Delta in-flight safety card from 1983. The ink had not faded. An amateur historian took possession of the card. 2 weeks later, he posted on an obscure internet forum. "I dream of waiting rooms with no exits. I dream of takeoff that never ends. I wake up humming blue skies." His account was deleted 3 days later. Forum logs show the deletion came from a server located in Langley, Virginia. Some believe that Flight 077 never crashed because it never stopped flying, and others believe it only ever existed to reopen a door, one we were never meant to find again. But somehow, again and again, it finds us. In October 2018, a box surfaced at an estate sale outside of Macon, Georgia. Among the collection of war memorabilia and amateur aviation relics was a decaying leather pilot satchel, unremarkable at first glance. Inside was a collection of documents, maps, and an audio cassette marked only with the initials EG and a date 4/13/83, one day before Flight 077 vanished. The seller, unaware of its significance, sold it for $8. A week later, the buyer, an independent documentarian named Lucas Hyland, uploaded fragments of the cassette to a private Discord group of aviation researchers. Within 36 hours, his channel went silent. His apartment was found emptied, no forced entry, no signs of struggle. The only thing left was a burned patch in the carpet, the shape of a triangle. But before his disappearance, Hyland posted a transcript of the tape's contents. It begins with engine noise, unmistakably that of a commercial jetliner, but layered with a strange interference, like water moving inside metal. Then a voice, strained and disoriented. "This is Ellis Granger. I don't know how long we've been out. The stars are wrong. The clocks don't move. Some of them, they're starting to forget." There's a long silence. Then, "We see lights, but there's no ground beneath them. There's only reflection." The voice repeats a sequence of numbers, unintelligible at first, but when run through astronomical software, it matches the coordinates of a sky sector where Earth's magnetic field briefly collapsed in April 1983 due to an unexplained solar anomaly. A NASA solar report from that year, later retracted, called the event an inversion of expected polar flux, a phenomenon that should not have been possible, but the tape didn't stop there. In its final moments, after a low pulse overtakes the cockpit audio, a new voice enters, unlike the first. Calm, slow, too measured. It doesn't speak in words at first, only sounds, patterns like reverse speech, processed phonemes. But with filtering, researchers uncovered the phrase cabin integrity sustained, manifest stabilized, extraction delayed, observe. The implications shook the group. This wasn't a mayday, it was a status report. From whom or to whom remains unknown. Parallel to these developments, a researcher named Madeline Carruthers, a linguistics professor at Tulane with a background in cognitive drift and auditory hallucinations, began cataloging cases of what she called ghost recurrence syndrome, a phenomenon where individuals claim to live through the same 30-45-minute interval repeatedly. All cases shared key phrases, references to aircraft, to floating without flight, and to music under the seat. Her most chilling interview was with a woman who had never flown before, but woke nightly reciting airline safety instructions in a dead language. Carruthers traced a pattern. All subjects lived along a curved line stretching from Dallas to Atlanta, the original flight path of ZO 77. She called it the corridor. More alarming, several of these individuals were born after 1983. They couldn't have remembered the flight, unless memory, like time, was no longer bound to chronology. Unless the plane, in vanishing, had ruptured something deeper, not just in airspace, but in cognition, in history, in us. A black site facility in West Virginia, long rumored to be a cognitive echo lab run by DARPA under the name Facility Iota, was cited in a leaked memo titled Post-Event Temporal Anchoring. The document warned of civilian contamination via proximity dreaming and advised immediate relocation of all who reported passenger syndrome within a 14-mile radius of known interference fields. One of the case studies included an elderly woman from Chattanooga who, upon hearing an overhead jetliner, would fall into catatonia and whisper the same line over and over, "Not again, not again, not again." She had no relatives on Flight 077, but she lived near Echo Station. In late 2020, a military satellite registered a short, unexplained heat bloom in that same airspace. There were no aircraft on radar, no weather anomalies, but in the sensor data, the shape was unmistakable. An elongated cylinder with swept wings, 727 dimensions, hovering for just over 19 seconds before vanishing without trace. Analysts dismissed it as solar reflection off swamp gas. Except for one detail, The same heat bloom was recorded 9 years earlier, and 9 before that, always in October, always in the corridor. One researcher who reviewed the data scrawled a note in the file margin before resigning. It read, "Not a plane, a repetition." And so we return to the impossible question. What is Flight 077? A machine trapped in time? A ghost dragged forward by memory? A breach that never healed? Or, and this may be the most frightening idea of all, a mirror we built ourselves and then forgot why we looked? In the spring of 2022, a routine software audit at an archival substation of the Library of Congress in Culpeper, Virginia, flagged an anomaly in a microfiche batch imported from the FAA in 1994. Among the digital records was a corrupted file marked Delta Manifest 077 vfinal.psig. It had been misfiled under transportation logistics. When decrypted by archival AI, the document revealed a passenger list identical to the original 1983 manifest, except for 6 names. These 6 individuals were not listed in any version of the FAA's official records, not in pre-boarding logs, not in gate camera footage, not in Delta's corporate database. In fact, the names did not exist anywhere prior to 1983, but they existed after. Searches into birth and death certificates revealed that each of the 6 had social security numbers issued in 1992. One was found to have worked at a gas station in Ocala, Florida. One died in a boating accident in 2001. One was admitted to a psychiatric facility after being discovered trying to board a grounded aircraft in Atlanta, claiming, "I've got to get back. I left my body on board." The others simply vanished, leaving behind only blurry photographs and fragments of odd behavior, muttering airport codes, folding paper napkins into crude aircraft, waking at 9:41 p.m. nightly. Who were they? Ghosts inserted into reality? Passengers added to a flight that was never meant to land? A theory emerged in classified aviation think tanks known as manifest expansion. It suggests that certain aircraft, particularly those exposed to electromagnetic disruptions and temporal anomalies, may accrue mass beyond their original structure. Not physical mass, but informational. Memory, identity, presence. That something about the experience of being lost in time rewrites not just the story of the plane, but the world around it. In 1985, a janitor at Hartsfield-Jackson was fired for refusing to clean Gate C-12. His explanation: "There's a plane in there that doesn't leave, but it always boards." He passed away in 1993. Among his possessions was a boarding pass for Flight 077 dated 1983, except the date on the pass had been overwritten with 1992, then 2001, then 2009, in faint pencil marks. It wasn't the only one. In 2017, a woman in Knoxville posted on an online memorabilia forum about a strange thrift store find, a Delta travel kit containing a blanket, a sealed bag of peanuts, and a passenger feedback card dated April 14, 1983. She hadn't heard of the flight. When other users explained its backstory, she went silent. A week later, she returned to the forum with a photo of her bedroom wall. The card had begun to flake, revealing handwritten text underneath. One sentence, repeating over and over, "You were here too. Don't forget again." Meanwhile, surveillance footage from a Jacksonville airport in late 2021 recorded a passenger wandering into a secured tarmac area near a closed jetway. He wore outdated travel clothes, a beige blazer, corduroy pants, a pilot's pin. When approached by TSA, he calmly turned and asked, "Is this gate still boarding for 077? His voice matched archived recordings of co-pilot James E. Halverson, presumed dead in 1983. By the time identity confirmation was underway, he had vanished. Only his shoes were left behind. Inside one was a napkin folded into a tiny airplane, stained with salt water. And salt water keeps appearing. Recovered fragments of the plane's fuselage, quietly stored in a Lockheed research facility in Nevada, reportedly leak small amounts of saline each equinox. Engineers blame condensation, but lab samples reveal an unusual signature. The water's molecular structure shows trace isotopes not found in Earth's oceans. One physicist reviewing the data wrote only, "This water has seen somewhere else. It's homesick." Most of the physical evidence has now been misplaced. Samples gone, files redacted, witnesses unreachable. But those involved in the early investigations, retired FAA staff, ex-NTSB agents, airport workers, have all reported the same recurring event. They receive voicemails, always between 9:40 and 9:42 p.m., no caller ID, no message, just ambient noise, engine hum, a low rhythmic thump, and sometimes music. One ex-controller, in his final interview before succumbing to early-onset Alzheimer's, said this: "It wasn't a crash, it wasn't even a flight, it was a translation between what was and what might still be. We only caught it because the sky hiccuped." Then he paused. "They're not lost. We are." Flight 077's shadow stretches beyond the event. It infects timelines. It reappears like an echo that hasn't finished speaking, like a question still forming. Where did it go? Or, more terrifying, did it ever go anywhere at all? Or are we the ones who went somewhere and forgot the way back? In January 2023, a maintenance crew resurfacing an old parking structure near Miami International uncovered a locked electrical cabinet, half buried under layers of concrete and paint. Inside were 26 VHS tapes, each labeled with a date ranging from 1982 to 1994. The labels were written in the same blue ink and slanted script, all initialed JH. Most tapes were blank or degraded, except one. Tape Noctra 13 contained 3 hours of grainy airport footage, apparently recorded from an internal security feed. The camera pointed toward Gate B-17. The timestamp on the footage, July 9, 1992. The night flight 077 landed. There is no record of a Gate B-17 at Miami International. No maps, no construction permits, no renovation reports. The terminal ends at Gate B-16. Yet the video clearly shows a functional gate. And something else. For 17 minutes, beginning at 3:21 a.m., the boarding tunnel trembles slightly. Lights flicker. Then, from the left edge of the frame, a 727 drifts into view, its landing gear already deployed. No tires screeching, no reverse thrusters, no external lights. The jet rolls to a stop at the non-existent gate. It never touches the jet bridge. It just sits there. No personnel approach it, no passengers disembark. But faintly, in the video's final minute, the reflection in the glass shows movement inside the cabin. Silhouettes, dozens of them, sitting upright, unmoving, watching. The tape ends abruptly. No one knows who JH was. No one can explain how a non-existent gate was recorded. Attempts to scan the footage digitally cause system crashes. One archivist reported nausea and bleeding gums after attempting to enhance the audio. But it doesn't stop there. In a file unearthed by a civilian aviation enthusiast through an old DoD archive torrent, long since scrubbed, there was a reference to something called the gate principle. Allegedly part of a DARPA white paper, the theory posited that certain geographic locations, particularly those involving heavy infrastructure, trauma, and continuous directional movement, can act as psychic hinges, points where reality bends under the strain of repeated expectation. Airports in this theory are not just transit hubs, they are pressure valves, gateways not between places, but between versions of place. In one entry, dated April 1983, the theory is applied to Flight 077. An aircraft operating along a disrupted hinge line may not land. It may recur, it may retain its passengers, or worse, it may reflect them. That idea, reflection, began to resurface in unofficial reports from flight attendants, pilots, and even air traffic controllers across the southeastern United States in the decades following. Cases of familiar faces boarding multiple flights years apart, passengers with names that never appear in booking records, people sitting in the wrong seat and not moving when challenged. Most of these stories were written off as urban legends, training stress, sleep deprivation, but one case stands apart. In 2004, a newly hired flight attendant, Sarah Mendel, filed a report after a short haul from Tallahassee to Charlotte. During beverage service, she noticed a woman in row 17 staring at her. The woman never blinked, never spoke. Her ticket had no seat number. After landing, the woman was gone, but in the seatback pocket, Mendel found a torn flight manifest. At the top, Delta 077, handwritten in pen, row 17, still here. Sarah quit flying the next day. Years later, she was found living in the Florida Keys under an alias. Her journals, uncovered after her death, contained dozens of pages written entirely in mirror script. Reversed coordinates, names of passengers from the original 1983 manifest, and this line, scratched over and over in frantic loops, "They can only leave when someone takes their place." Which raises the question, how many have? The reappearance of Flight 077 may not be an isolated event. Data from private radar collectors in the Caribbean and Gulf regions show ghost signatures, aircraft that appear briefly, follow outdated flight paths, and vanish. One radar tech called them sky echoes. Another, a military contractor, called them recurrences. Always 727s, always without transponder data, always flying where Flight 077 once should have been. But what if these aren't echoes? What if they're invitations? As investigators tried to catalogue and contain the mystery, a shift occurred in the language used internally. No longer was it described as a lost flight. Now it was an unresolved trajectory. As if Flight 077 isn't behind us, but ahead. As if it's still unfolding. And somewhere, just past the edge of radar, that jet is still flying. Still circling. Still waiting for clearance that will never come. In March 2023, a technician at an abandoned weather station near Montgomery, Alabama, Station 44, decommissioned since 1991, accessed a dormant terminal out of curiosity. It powered on, miraculously, despite decades without maintenance. On the screen, a monochrome interface blinking with a single auto-launching prompt, Delta 077.log. The technician, whose name was never publicly released, transferred the file to a USB drive. Within a week, the station was raised in what the county listed as storm damage cleanup. No storm had been recorded. The contents of that file were later leaked through a secure aviation history forum hidden behind layers of cryptographic riddles. When decrypted, the file revealed what appeared to be a pilot's log, but not typed and not transcribed. Rather, it was generated live, line by line, by an unknown source. Each entry was time-stamped. Each described events that, upon review, matched weather phenomena, radar malfunctions, and radio blackouts over the southeastern US, all on dates where Flight 077 sightings were reported. One log entry, dated July 9, 1992, reads, "Re-establishing altitude coherence. Noise in the cabin is like breathing, but not ours. A smell of salt and ozone. Artificial horizon is holding at 12 degrees. No stars, just reflections." Another, from January 2011. "Wheels down, attempt failed. Ground below appears false, like memory. Cabin repeating last 90 seconds. Passenger 5D is humming again. Cabin crew unresponsive. Gate not visible." The tone is not panicked. It is clinical, as if whatever is logging these entries has adapted to the anomaly. And that may be the most unsettling part. Adaptation. There is mounting evidence, buried in fringe neuroscience reports and abandoned DARPA patents, suggesting that Flight 077 and those aboard may not be static remnants of a lost past. Rather, they're evolving, observing, learning how to mimic the rules of our world. Consider the growing number of reports involving almost correct aircraft. Jets that look like real commercial flights, but with oddities, reversed airline logos, non-standard windows, emergency doors that appear welded shut. In 2019, a pilot in Jacksonville logged an encounter with what he described as a mirror jet, flying in silent tandem with his own. Same speed, same altitude. When air traffic control was alerted, they saw nothing on radar, but the co-pilot saw it too and reported that inside, the passengers weren't sitting. They were standing, all of them, facing the windows. The FAA classified the incident under atmospheric reflection distortion, but the report was sealed. Meanwhile, a small group of civilian researchers formed a private network to document sightings of the anomaly. They call it the Loop Watch. Through a combination of flight data, dream journals, and recovered psychic impressions, a method they refer to as imprint tracing, they believe the pattern is no longer isolated to Flight 077. Instead, it's metastasizing, attaching itself to new routes, new aircraft, and perhaps even new travelers. Their most disturbing theory? That exposure to the Flight 077 frequency, which they claim is embedded in certain FAA communication logs and control tower recordings, alters perception. Not drastically, just enough. Clocks stutter. Shadows hang longer than they should. One woman claimed her flight from Atlanta to DC only took 6 minutes. Her phone said otherwise. The flight log was blank. She later received a message. "Thank you for flying with us. Your memory will stabilize shortly." But the strangest incident was recorded in 2020 at a long-abandoned commuter terminal in Savannah, Georgia. A homeless man was discovered living inside the gutted building. He had converted a ticket counter into a shrine, maps pinned to walls, flight schedules marked with wax. All flights led to one, DRO 77. When questioned, he said only, "I missed it once, I won't miss it again." He then handed the officer a boarding pass from his coat, yellowed, folded, dated 1983. The paper was pristine, the ink still wet. His fingerprints matched no known database. He vanished from holding later that night. Surveillance footage showed a bright flicker outside the window, like heat, lightning with no storm. A single frame captured a jet in the sky, unmarked, silent, a 727, banking east. Again and again, the story repeats. Sightings, disappearances, data that won't hold still. It's as if Flight 077 is not just an object in time, but a pressure, something pushing against the edges of understanding, nudging reality into misshapen forms, something that keeps returning, not to land, but to remind us. In early 2024, a research assistant at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, uncovered a misfiled package buried deep within a collection of Cold War psychological warfare documents. Inside were yellowing pages stamped with redacted CIA notations, a strip of undeveloped film, and a thin notebook labeled Contingency DRO 77 Event. No author, no date, no official file number. Just that single word, event, underlined 3 times. The notebook was a log, not of a flight, but of a surveillance protocol. It detailed passenger adjacency behavior, instructions for temporal resonance mapping, and something referred to cryptically as the mirror bleed. According to the log, Flight 077 wasn't merely a lost aircraft, it was a recurrent incursion. A cycle that returns not to the origin, but to the observer. It wasn't about where the plane had been, it was about who saw it, and when. The final entry was barely legible. A scrawl of ink on the back inside cover, written shakily and likely in haste. If it's seen again, do not engage, do not approach, do not remember. That last instruction is what drew the attention of cognitive science consultants reviewing the file. Do not remember. As if the act of remembering itself is dangerous. One of the consultants, Dr. Yashvi Ananth, was quoted in a now-deleted symposium transcript. "If the plane is an echo, memory is the chamber it rings through. Every report, every recovered item, every story spreads the anomaly. They didn't hide the evidence to cover it up. They hid it to stop it from growing." The notebook wasn't the only thing in the package. The strip of undeveloped film, once processed, revealed a series of black and white stills, long-range aerial shots, blurry but unmistakable. A 727 on a long runway flanked by empty fields. But the markings on the aircraft were wrong. Not Delta, but a crude imitation of it. Letters were reversed. windows uneven. The ground around the plane was scorched in a ring, and in the final frame, something was walking away from the jet. Its shape was humanoid, but too tall, limbs too long. It cast no shadow. Despite digital scrub attempts, the images leaked. The amateur net sleuths who preserved them noticed something else. When layered and inverted, the photos revealed a faint outline of a boarding staircase, not on the tarmac, but floating in mid-air. Access points, or exits. That same month, a series of short-range VLF, very low frequency, anomalies were logged across North America. Air traffic communication lines experienced unexplained distortions, subtle at first, then sharper. At 9:41 p.m. EST, every plane flying above 15,000 feet between Georgia and Texas reported 1 second of dead air. No signal, no radar, no internal comms, just silence. Then everything came back. No one hurt, no planes lost, but every black box recorded the same sound in that moment, a tone. Low, almost subaudible. Analysts compared it to a pressure wave, something between sonar and breath. Some likened it to the pre-earthquake harmonics heard before a tectonic shift. Passengers on those flights reported strange phenomena. One man claimed he looked out his window and saw a second jet, identical to his own, flying parallel, except all the windows were dark. Others described an overwhelming sense of déjà vu or sudden memories of airports they'd never been to. One woman broke down sobbing mid-flight, whispering, "I was there. I boarded. I know I did." The FAA dismissed the event as brief signal latency during routine relay maintenance, but inside a locked cabinet at a regional ATC office in Birmingham, Alabama, someone left behind a printed radar screen image from that night. In the center, a tiny blinking dot. The label reads DL077. No known flight matched it. No transponder, no registration. And this time, it didn't vanish. It's still there, hovering. Every night at 9:41. Loopwatch members call this the fix point, a phrase from celestial navigation denoting a constant reference. Except here, the reference is something that should no longer exist, but does and must. Because if Flight 077 stopped, what would that mean for us? That perhaps we've been passengers all along, flying in circles, waiting for a gate that was never meant to open, and maybe it already has. In April 2024, a series of unmarked packages were delivered to 6 separate institutions, 2 museums, 3 academic departments, and 1 retired radar technician living in rural Kentucky. Each package contained an identical item, a black box flight recorder, not a replica, not a model, real regulation-grade cockpit voice recorders, scratched, heat-warped, and labeled with a serial number that matched only one known aircraft, Delta Flight 077. The FAA issued a formal statement declaring the devices hoaxes of unknown origin. Yet within 48 hours, federal agents had recovered all but one of the boxes. The 6th remains missing. But a partial transcript, uploaded anonymously to a secure server used by aviation investigators, circulated for just 72 minutes before being wiped. Several users archived the file before takedown. Its contents were disjointed, distorted by time, degradation, or something else entirely. But fragments emerged. The first voice is the captain's. Calm, measured, then increasingly uncertain. Cabin pressure nominal, but the stars are moving, fast, no turn, instruments holding. They're pulling back. No, they're watching. Then silence. Then a second voice, female, a flight attendant. "We've served the last row 3 times. They don't speak, they don't blink. I think they know." Background noise rises, not static, but music. Blue skies, warped, slowed, playing backward, then something else, a voice that isn't human, a cadence without language but shaped like it, low, resonant, saying something that doesn't translate or shouldn't. The final line of the transcript is typed, not spoken. Cabin time fully untethered, loop integrity failing, begin substitution protocol. No one knows what that means, But afterward, Loopwatch forums, now fractured and scattered across encrypted channels, began tracking a new series of reports. Not of Flight 077, but of other flights. Modern, unrelated, behaving oddly. Planes seen landing twice. Passengers emerging from jetways and walking back in. Phones recording footage that doesn't match flight duration. Children claiming they've flown on the silver plane where the people sleep with their eyes open. A Delta flight in June 2024 was diverted after passengers reported that the in-flight safety video showed outdated seatbelt designs from the 1980s. The crew didn't notice. Upon landing, no copy of the safety video matched the version seen. Several passengers later received anonymous texts. "Thank you for joining us again. You're getting closer." Closer to what? Researchers now speak of chronotaxia, not time travel, but time misplacement. A drift, a bleed. The theory suggests that Flight 077 is not an isolated fracture, but a structural failure. A rupture in collective memory, spilling echoes forward, backward, sideways. People touched by it report symptoms, lost time, false memories, repeating dreams of jet bridges in fog. Even airports have begun to change. Some workers report gates that shouldn't exist appearing briefly in scheduling software. Code DL077 pops up for fractions of a second before vanishing. On 2 occasions, passengers with boarding passes for Flight 077 have been found waiting at terminals, confused, sweating, always at 9:41 p.m. They never remember buying a ticket, and the loop tightens. In the final page of an unpublished FAA incident manual, a draft created in 1994, long believed shredded, the last line reads, "If passenger count exceeds original manifest, anomaly is expanding. Evacuation no longer advised. Containment has failed." Flight 077 may have been the beginning. A fracture, yes, but also a reflection, not of the plane, not even of time, of us. Our trust in systems, in repetition, in return flights and familiar gates. But what if the very mechanisms we created to move us, across miles, across hours, became the vectors for something else? Something that learned to wear the skin of routine? There are still reports, a boarding door that won't unlock, a voice on the PA calling a gate that no longer exists, a baby staring at the ceiling for the entire flight, eyes wide, unblinking. And sometimes a jet is seen above the horizon, a silhouette at sunset. No contrail, no sound, just a 727, old and silver, flying steady into twilight. Some say if you watch it long enough, it banks, just slightly, like it sees you too, and it always flies east, towards something, or maybe away from something we've already forgotten.